Greetings and salutations everyone, my name is Andrew Kirchhoff and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my hidden gems for week 10 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Though on last night's Thursday night football game between the Indianapolis Colts and Tennessee Titans, the game seemed like everything was going just fine, and then all of a sudden the snap occurred once again. For many of us, we witnessed it as the punt shanked for 17 yards and snowballed the game in the direction of the Indianapolis Colts. For many of us, we were relying on the performances of guys like AJ Brown, Derrick Henry to carry our weeks, and even guys like support players like Jonathan Taylor to step up. But unfortunately, with the snap occurring, their fantasy value disappeared. Now, besides those kind of players, there are many players that are in our current lineups as of right now that are probably going to miss this upcoming week. Running backs like David Johnson, David Montgomery, Joe Mixon, and even Chris Carson are going to potentially miss this upcoming week because of the snap. So on today's episode, we're going to go out and look for 6 hidden gems throughout the fantasy football universe in order to complete the fantasy football gauntlet and help us finish our lineups and give us a better chance of winning in week 10 of our 2020 fantasy football seasons. Again, there's only 3 or 4 more weeks until the fantasy football playoffs begin. And once they do, there's no going back. So we have to go ahead and get ourselves as many wins as we possibly can. Hopefully some of our hidden gems for today can help us get there and help us accomplish that. So before we begin, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support as of late. Again, we are so close to surpassing 34,000 subscribers here on the channel. So if you have not yet already, support the channel by subscribing, clicking the like button down below, and commenting. For those of you who are looking for timestamps on a specific player, of course, you can go down below in the description of the video and find timestamps down there. For those of you looking for extra content in terms of rankings, flex rankings on a daily basis, extra private Patreon stuff, you can go ahead and check out the Patreon link down below in the description of the video. Outside of that, in the first line of the description, you can also find our Discord server. For those of you who are trying to find extra content, talk all things fantasy football, our Discord server is there. Just yesterday for about 20 to 30 minutes, we had a pretty much quick rapid fire Q&A. There was 50 people in the Discord chat, even though there was a lot of people in there. It was pretty awesome just, getting everybody's opinions and just trying to fire through as many questions as possible and help you guys out. So I'm glad you guys are joining that and enjoying that. Hopefully we'll continue to have that going in the right direction. Okay, so without further ado, let's start talking about some hidden gems for this upcoming week. And on the screen, our Power Stone, we travel to Xandar in order to collect Duke Johnson, the running back for the Houston Texans, because this upcoming week, David Johnson is most likely going to be out. Now, if many of you haven't seen the hit that David Johnson took last week, it was a pretty nasty one, to say the very least. Defenseless receiver, took a fat shot to the head, and obviously has a concussion, is probably going to miss because he is still in the concussion protocol this week. Now, what exactly does that present for Duke Johnson's value? Now, as soon as David Johnson went out of the game early in that contest last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, Duke Johnson stepped up and stepped in and had himself a pretty good game, playing 81% of the total snaps for the Houston Texans. He accumulated a total of 20 touches, 4 through the air, 16 on the ground, 41 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, and 32 receiving yards. Ultimately, it was a fantastic game in terms of coming in and producing, and many of us didn't have him in our lineups last week because, of course, David Johnson is the starter. But if and when David Johnson goes down, of course, Duke Johnson, we've seen him be a relevant fantasy back going back to his days in Cleveland a little bit last year when he had high, touchdown upside. And I think this upcoming week against the Cleveland Browns, he absolutely has that high touchdown upside. Now, the situation with the Cleveland Browns matchup, it will be played in Cleveland. Weather concerns for this week are very similar to the way that they were in week 8 when the Cleveland Browns took on the Las Vegas Raiders. In that game, high winds, a pretty good chance for rain, and that's kind of looking like what it's going to turn into this upcoming week with 25 plus mile per hour winds in that contest. So teams aren't going to be able to pass the ball, and instead it will be a running contest between the Houston Texans and the Cleveland Browns. And of course, that favors the Cleveland Browns, of course, coming off of a bye week, getting their offensive starting guard back, potentially Nick Chubb. But Duke Johnson still has a lot of gas left in the tank. This is a revenge game for him, playing against his former team that he asked to be traded away from because, of course, they weren't getting him enough touches. I think this is a very interesting prospect here. I'm very excited about the potential of Duke Johnson. Though he's owned in 71% of leagues, hopefully y'all have gone and picked him up based off of the waiver wire recommendation I made earlier this week. So if you've picked him up and you're going to start him, I think he's a fantastic play this upcoming week as our Power Stone. So let's go ahead and throw him up on the board and move on to our next hidden gem for this upcoming week. We talk about Jimmy Graham as the Space Stone. Now, here's the thing about Jimmy Graham. I've mentioned this a little bit yesterday with the tight end video. his matchup is as good as it could possibly get. Now, it's not as great as playing against the Atlanta Falcons at the tight end position or the Cincinnati Bengals, but the Minnesota Vikings have shown a pretty glaring weakness in terms of covering tight ends just this season. And the way that I've seen Jimmy Graham kind of progress over the last couple of weeks, and especially with Nick Foles under center, it seems that he's obviously not only getting more opportunity, but producing more. So here's the thing that Jimmy Graham is most likely to accomplish this upcoming week. Probably similar numbers to last week with potential touchdown upside. Last week, 6 targets, 6 receptions for 55 receiving yards. That kind of base is pretty solid for him. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he still ends up getting 8.5 fantasy points as of right now with guys like Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, George Kittle out. 8.5 points, we'll take it. At any given time, the tight end position could give you 0. So we'll take 8.5 points. We'd love to see it. So I think Jimmy Graham, only owned in 57% of Yahoo leagues as of right now, seems to be a pretty good pickup and play if you can go ahead and snag him and throw him into your starting tight end position. Again, last week put up 14.5 points, but I think a lot of people look at the Minnesota Vikings defense and they think, man, they give up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. They've given up on average 2 receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers per game. And their cornerbacks have been, pretty much inexperienced and unhealthy this entire season in terms of, reoccurring hamstring injuries, concussions, and all this kind of jazz. But they should be back and ready to go. The cornerbacks should be set to go. I believe the potential of Jimmy Graham being a huge part of this offense going into this upcoming week's matchup is a very good possibility. Again, you won't have David Montgomery, and you'll have to continue to pass the ball. So where do they look? To potentially Jimmy Graham as a bit of a security blanket for Nick Foles. Just to kind of give you some perspective as to how well tight ends have played against the Minnesota Vikings this year. As of the last couple weeks, TJ Hawkinson, 5 catches, 39 yards, and a touchdown. The Packers, Jay Sternberger and Robert Tonyan combined for 8 catches, 125 yards. Hayden Hurst, a couple weeks back, 4 catches, 57 and a touchdown. Will Disley, 1 catch, 19 and a touchdown. Jonnu Smith, 5 catches, 61 yards. Mo Alley Cox, 5 catches, 111 yards. Again, they've been giving up a lot of points, and in just the past 3 weeks, they've been giving up on average 14 points to opposing tight ends in a half PPR scoring format on average. So again, this kind of trend is leaning in the direction of helping Jimmy Graham. I think the sky's the limit for him, and I think he's got a very good upside for a touchdown and the potential to produce once again at the tight end position. That is why he is this week's Space Stone. We throw him on the board, and we move on to our next hidden gem for this upcoming week. We have ourselves Troymaine Pope. Now, here is the situation and the reality of it going into this upcoming week. Though Austin Eckler is only a couple weeks away from returning to the starting lineup of the Los Angeles Chargers, the last couple weeks has been pretty much a question mark as to who the real lead back of this Los Angeles Chargers team is. I mean, we've seen 4 running backs in this rotation. We've even seen fullbacks steal touchdowns, but mainly we've seen, of course, Joshua Kelly, Justin Jackson, Kalen Ballage, and Troymaine Pope. And we talk about Troymaine Pope today because last week, of course, he was dealing with a concussion that he sustained in week 8, and he is returning from that injury to potentially take over the starting running back job of the Los Angeles Chargers against the Miami Dolphins this week. And the reality of the situation is that as of right now, Justin Jackson left last week's game with a knee injury and is going to miss this week's game. Kalen Ballage, who stepped up as the lead back role of last week's team and had himself 15 carries for 69 yards, a receiving touchdown, a couple catches out of the backfield, and 15.4 fantasy points, he has gone back down to the practice squad. So what exactly does that leave us? It leaves us with Joshua Kelly, who's been averaging 3 yards per carry for the team. Absolutely been terrible. And on top of it, has 11 targets, 11 receptions for 48 yards. So again, not really doing well in the passing game either. Joshua Kelly has pretty much been the bottom of the barrel in terms of productivity and breakout percentages in terms of opportunity leading to his success. So why not go for a guy like Troymaine Pope, a guy that, again, the last time we saw him a week against the Denver Broncos defense was gashing him. 10 total carries for 67 yards on the ground, 7 total targets, 5 receptions for 28 yards, playing only 29% of snaps in that game, which was 25 total plays, and getting the ball 15 times in those 25 plays. So again, they're going to get him the ball, and I think this upcoming week against the Miami Dolphins, who give up the 11th most points to opposing running backs, and the fact that the Los Angeles Chargers have targeted running backs in their offense 35 times in the last 5 weeks, which is 7 times per game, just leads in the direction of potentially getting more and more touches for Troymaine Pope as the week progresses. And I think this upcoming week, in a matchup that should be pretty high scoring back and forth, this team wanting to get their running backs involved in the passing game, just seems like Troymaine Pope could be a great option this week. Earlier this week, I talked about Kalen Ballage in my Tuesday running back video, mentioning that he'd be a good play if he's ready to go. Of course, I did not know that he was going to be later that afternoon dropped into the practice squad, a little bucket there. But here comes Troymaine Pope off of the concussion. Should be a great play this week. Only owned in 6% of leagues. I think the reality of the situation leads to his potential success this week. And that is why we mentioned Troymaine Pope, of course. Now we can move on to our next hidden gem for this upcoming week. We traveled to Vormir to collect the Soul Stone, and as many of us know, the Soul Stone requires a sacrifice. Someone that unfortunately has to take the fall for the potential success of a guy like Ryan Nall this upcoming week. We are sacrificing David Montgomery, running back of the Chicago Bears, a guy that, though he has not played well this season and has had a couple glares, a couple instances of showing that he is a great talent, hasn't really been able to produce this season, and dealing with an injury, he'll probably be out this upcoming week, giving a player like Ryan Nall, who's only owned in 1% of leagues, a true opportunity to not only step up, but be a constant producer in this offense in a matchup in which, in my opinion, should be a very juicy one for the running backs of the Chicago Bears. Of course, we know without David Montgomery here, without Tariq Cohen obviously tearing his ACL earlier in the season, we don't really have many options. It's either Cordero Patterson, for those of you who play in ESPN, could potentially start him as a running back, or it's Ryan Nall. And I think Ryan Nall, after what he did just this past Sunday, getting 4 targets, 4 receptions for 35 yards and a receiving touchdown, playing only 13% of the snaps, of course, because David Montgomery got hurt late in that game, but in 10 snaps, had 4 total touches in a 2-minute drill. Getting him the rock was a consistent thing in that offense. And I think as we go into this upcoming week, I think to myself, what is the potential of Ryan Nall against the Minnesota Vikings defense? Well, it's pretty plain and simple in my eyes. In the last 2 weeks, the Minnesota Vikings defense has given up a total of 16 receptions to running backs. And though we haven't seen Ryan Nall run the ball, because when he came in the game, it was a 2-minute drill. They were down, 17 points in the last 5 minutes, and they had to definitely get the ball going. I think that Ryan Nall actually is a pretty good receiving back and could be their receiving back this week. So again, when I looked at the production of what the Minnesota Vikings are giving up, they're giving up the 14th most points to opposing running backs this season. That in itself, great for a running back in the Chicago Bears offense this week. But again, they're giving up a lot of receptions, 16 in the last 2 weeks. And in fact, they've given up the 7th most receptions to running backs just this season in the National Football League. So again, there is a very wide set of opportunity for him. The defense isn't great against running backs. They've given up a lot of receptions. And the way that the Chicago Bears offense has kind of functioned over the last couple of weeks, it seems to me like there could be an opportunity in which they get down early because Dalvin Cook's running them over and they have to come back late in the game, and you get a player like Ryan Nall more involved, or he comes out early, touches the ball 10 plus times on the ground like David Montgomery has done all season long, gets his opportunity, and has the high upside potential of falling into the end zone. I've watched highlights on Ryan Nall. He is not a bad running back. There's a reason why he's in the National Football League. Of course, he hasn't been given his fair share of opportunity, but maybe he can go ahead, act upon said opportunity, and do pretty good justice for many of our fantasy teams and get himself more of a carved out role in this offense. I like Ryan Nall this upcoming week. Now we can go ahead and move on to our next hidden gem for this upcoming week. We talk about the time stone, Gus Edwards. Now I know many of you are a little upset about what happened last week with J.K. Dobbins. Again, it happens. They played against a tough defense. I anticipated the potential that the Baltimore Ravens were better than the Indianapolis Colts front seven because of how successful they were against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But of course, that wasn't the case. And though I miss sometimes on this channel making bold predictions, that's the entire point of this hidden gem segment. Making bold prediction on players that aren't owned in very many leagues. Speaking of one, we have Gus Edwards only owned in 36% of Yahoo leagues right now. And from what we've seen over the last couple weeks, he's gotten consistent opportunity in this backfield, and this upcoming week they take on one of the easier matchups, in my opinion, playing against the New England front seven. Gus Edwards in the last couple weeks, 14 carries, 16 carries, 11 carries. Though his yards per carry average hasn't been great, he has scored a touchdown in every single game. This upcoming week they take on the New England Patriots. Of course, the last time the Baltimore Ravens took on the New England Patriots last season, Mark Ingram ran for 15 carries and 115 yards. Lamar Jackson, 61 total yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. This team has succeeded against them in the running game. And as of this week, it seems to me that the weather conditions are probably on the side of, hey, this is probably going to be a running game because there is a 72% chance of precipitation. The rain is coming down, and it is going to lead to a defensive run battle in what both these teams are going to be running the ball heavily because, of course, both these teams want to prioritize the run with, of course, Cam Newton and Lamar Jackson as running quarterbacks. So What exactly has the New England Patriots given up in the last couple weeks to convince me that they are not a good run-stopping defense? You just got to look at the stats. I mean, just last week, Frank Gore's averaging 4 yards per carry against that defense. Phillip Lindsay, a couple of weeks back, 23 carries for 101 rushing yards. Jeff Wilson Jr., 112 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns against them. In that same game, Jermichael Hasty was playing well. Even Kyle Juszczyk had himself a couple good yard plays in that offense. On top of it, a couple weeks back against the Buffalo Bills, those two running backs, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, combined for 28 rushes for 167 yards. This defense has given up a lot of yards to a lot of opposing offenses, and I do not think they're not going to be able to stop them. I truly think that there is a very good opportunity for Gus Edwards, if in fact Mark Ingram is out and are limited, to continue to stay in this starting role, continue to score touchdowns in this offense as the goal line back, and find fantasy relevance on a weekly basis. And that's why we bring up Gus Edwards, because I truly think it is his final time to step up and command this backfield. He is our time stone for this upcoming week. We move on to the final hidden gem for this upcoming week, and it is the Mind Stone. Cursed with knowledge, I believe Josh Reynolds could be of a great service to many of our fantasy football lineups, and I'll tell you why. As of right now, Cooper Kupp is dealing with a wrist and oblique injury. He was currently questionable all week long, and Sean McVay said, yes, he's banged up, but he's going to play. That being said, they play against the easiest matchup at the wide receiver position, the Seattle Seahawks, giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season. A couple of the stats that I wanted to pluck out. As of right now, the Seattle Seahawks in a half PPR are giving up 48.56 fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. If you separate and divide that amongst 3 wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and potentially Josh Reynolds, each of them could potentially score 16 points per week on average if in fact they are producing up to the standard of which other teams have played. Now again, that's not obviously a guarantee, but just kind of putting it in perspective, that is a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. Just this season alone, the Seattle Seahawks have given up 12 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, and 17 different wide receivers have surpassed 70 receiving yards against that defense. What we've seen Josh Reynolds do in the last couple of weeks has kind of given me more and more confidence to give him this opportunity this week. Again, in the last couple of weeks, 5 targets, 8 targets, 9 targets. The target numbers are increasing. His opportunities increasing. Therefore, his numbers are increasing. In the last couple of weeks, he's had 2 receiving touchdowns and getting himself more and more involved in this offense, playing nearly 80% of the offensive snaps. And though this offense loves to run 3 wide receiver sets, and he's in a little bit of a rotation, and he might not be the number 1 or 2 option in this offense in terms of a passing perspective, I truly do believe that Josh Reynolds, only owned in 3% of Yahoo leagues right now, could be a potential, pickup, put him in as a wide receiver 3 or a flex play if you're super desperate, if you're in a deeper league. I think Josh Reynolds, not a bad option. Again, when you're playing against one of the easier matchups on the week, and the defense is going to be keying in on covering and stopping Robert Woods and covering and stopping guys like Cooper Kupp, the next best option opens up for Jared Goff. He will continue to look for Josh Reynolds as he has in the last 2 weeks, of course, targeting him 17 total times in the last 2 games. So again, that kind of potential, that kind of upside leads to me believing that based on this, cursed with knowledge, I believe Josh Reynolds could be a great hidden gem for this upcoming week. All right, now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and move on, throw them up on the board, and cover all of our hidden gems for this week once more. These are our hidden gems for week 10 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Of course, we will review it. Duke Johnson as our power stone, Jimmy Graham as our space stone, Troymaine Pope as the reality stone, Ryan Nall as the soul stone, Gus Edwards as the time stone, and finally collecting the last stone, the mind stone, is Josh Reynolds. Thank you everybody for watching. I'll see you Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, kickoff with Kickoff week 10. Until then, thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.